everybody, me again. Next up, what a lot of you have been waiting for all day, we have Mandy from Civil War Ghosts, and she will be doing a live tour. I will bring her on screen. She can tell you all about it, and she will be taking over for the next hour. Hi, Mandy.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. You okay?
We're doing great out here. It's a beautiful day in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
That's great. I will leave you to explain everything to everybody, and I will leave you to carry on with the tour.
Okay.
Because they're interested to know what you're going to say, and the tour, not about me. So,
well, hopefully everyone will be entertained.
I'm sure they will be. Thank you so much for taking part. We really do appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And handing over to you.
All right. Sounds good. All right, folks. So thank you so much for joining Civil War Ghosts on this beautiful evening. No matter where you are from, we are so happy to have you out. It is a beautiful day, like I said, here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It's just a little bit overcast, and it's about 55 to 58 degrees. So it's nice and cool and very ominous outside right now. So I'm going to be sharing some stories with you this evening from Gettysburg. And I want to give you a quick introduction because we do have a lot of people that come here for ghost tours. This is a huge tourist town, and people know about the haunted history, but they don't always know quite why it's considered to be so haunted. So I'm going to give a introduction just to kind of orient you to what we're doing here in town and the things that have happened. So during the American Civil War in 1863, from July 1st to July 3rd, we had the Battle of Gettysburg here in town between Confederates and Union. Now, during this battle, there was an extreme amount of casualties and gore and violence. And so before the battle begins on July 1st, this is a small town in rural Pennsylvania. There's not a hospital within a day of here, and there's only about 2,500 residents. Now, when the battle begins, there is roughly 160,000 soldiers that come here and into town. Now, there's also a misconception here in Gettysburg. We're standing in the town of Gettysburg, Gettysburg proper, as they would call it here. But on the outsides of towns, they have these huge battlefields. And a lot of folks do believe that the Battle of Gettysburg was fought exclusively out on those battlefields. And while a lot of that is true, people don't realize how much of this battle was actually fought right here in town. So where I am standing currently is Confederate-occupied Gettysburg. Now, during this battle, it's the second hottest July in Gettysburg history. There is no artificial light, and there's no indoor plumbing. So as you can imagine, 160,000 soldiers coming into this small 2,500 person town. Not only that, they're bringing about 20,000 horses with them. Now you can imagine the physical devastation of the land here by just having that many people present. But the unfortunate thing is that after the battle here, after July 3rd, when the civilians came out of their homes or came back to town, they would discover about 10,000 dead bodies on the ground all around town. Not only that, we had tens of thousands more who were wounded or mortally wounded. Many of the homes in town become field hospitals, and we have thousands more men missing. Not only that, we have about 8,000 dead horses laying in the streets as well in that hot, hot July sun. Now, what did the folks do here in Gettysburg about this? Well, after the battle, we don't have unlimited resources here in town. So they say it takes almost a year to bury all the bodies here in town. And that the stench of death is so bad that it could be smelled up to 150 to 200 miles away, just depending on which way the wind would blow. And the folks here in town, just to leave their homes, would wear a mask over their nose and mouths, like many of us are doing now, except their masks were soaked in peppermint oil and rose water, just so they could stand the stench of their town. Now, what do you do with those bodies? You see, the Union are the heroes here in town. The Confederates are the enemies. So what they do try to do is give the Union men burial where they lay, in an individual dug grave. Our Confederates are not so lucky here in town. You see, because they are the enemy, the folks here, the civilians, they don't care much about the bodies. So a lot of these Confederate men would be tossed into mass graves. And they would talk about how over weeks' time, their bodies would swell, pushing together and uprooting and unearthing limbs, arms, legs, heads, making it a literal horror show here in town. Now, November 16th, after the battle, we do get the National Cemetery. It's dedicated by Abraham Lincoln. And so they exhume Union bodies from the ground and they give them a proper Christian burial up at the National Cemetery, because this is the Victorian era. And we believe very much that unless you receive a good Christian burial, your soul is not moving on from this earthly plane. Now, the Confederates, many Southern organizations would come up and exhume Confederate bodies and take them down to Southern soil to give them proper burial. The problem is here, folks, is that when they were putting these bodies in the ground, they don't know who these men are, they don't know where they're from, and they're not keeping track of where they're burying because there's so many. They're just trying to get these men in the ground. So everywhere you walk in Gettysburg is hallowed ground. And we know for a fact that there are soldiers in these grounds that have never made it to their final resting place. And not only that, these men die hot, scared, battle-worn, away from home, and it's not a good death. So it's all of these reasons combined that we believe that Gettysburg is so haunted. So I'm going to take you to a few locations this evening, and I'm going to be sharing the history about some people that lived here during the battle. I'm going to be sharing some local lore and legend. I'm going to be sharing a few stories about things that have happened to our guests on our tours. But we're going to have a great time, and let's go ahead and get started. So this is one of my favorite locations. We are standing right outside of the Tilly Pierce Inn. Now, Tilly, her full name is Matilda Pierce. She is 15 years old during the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, if you can imagine being 15 in 1863, we don't have computers, we don't have internet, we don't have social media, we don't have these things. And so she is a very innocent 15 years old. She only knows church and school and family, and that's about it. So Tilly, she lives next door to Mrs. Shriver. Mrs. Shriver has 2 young girls, and her husband is off fighting in the Civil War. Well, before the battle starts to really jump off here in town, Mrs. Shriver's father owns the Whitekirk farm about 3 miles outside of town. And so Mrs. Shriver asked the Pierce family, would it be okay if we took Tilly out to the farmhouse? It'll be much safer because on this side of town, things got very violent. And of course, the Pierce family agreed it would be best if 15-year-old Tilly went with Mrs. Shriver and her 2 young daughters, both under the age of 10, and went out to the Whitekirk farm. Well, it was kind of like jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire, because what ends up happening is the Whitekirk farm is located out by Little Round Top, and it becomes one of the bloodiest, most violent parts of the battle. Now, during her stay at the Whitekirk farm, it becomes a makeshift field hospital. And there are so many men who are wounded and dying. And Tilly writes a diary about going and taking Mrs. Shriver's young daughters, going to the well to fetch water, helping rip up bandages and helping with sick and dying men, helping with their wounds, talking to them. And she even writes a story later in her life called What a Girl Saw in Gettysburg. Now, after the battle, after what Tilly's seen, so much destruction, so much violence and gore, she's changed forever. Now, She does get word that her home is still intact and her family is alive. Mrs. Shriver gets the same information, and so they make that 3-mile hike back here to town, except this time it's very different, right? So many bodies on the ground. But Tilly cannot wait to get back here, to just be at home in her space with her family, to be in her own bed. But when she comes upon her home, right above the door, if you look closely, you will see a red flag. And what she finds out is that her home has become a field hospital here in town. So Tilly is thrown right back into action, helping her family take care of these sick and wounded men, some of them for 4 months after the battle. Now, I'm going to share with you what happens in this inn. Many people have reported the same instance. And so Tilly's childhood bedroom is left intact here at the Tilly Pierce house. Now, it's a beautiful bed and breakfast now. People come from all over to stay here. But if you stay in her bedroom, and it mostly happens to folks who are traveling individually on their own, you'll go to bed at night. And when you lay down in your bed and you turn off that light, you'll feel somebody sit down at the foot of your bed. You'll turn the light back on. And look, there will be nobody there. And you'll talk yourself down. You'll turn that light back off. This time you'll feel someone sit down at the foot of your bed, but then you'll hear the sobbing of a young girl. And that second time that you turn that light on, there will be a young woman sitting at the foot of your bed with her head in her hands, leaned over and just sobbing. And people report the same thing. They say that all of a sudden they're not afraid. They're not compelled to ask who this is or why they're in the room, and they're not compelled to run. They say that they're almost washed over with pity for the young girl. And so when you go to approach the young woman, she will stand up. She will turn and face you. And when she drops her hands from her eyes, there will be blood pouring out from her eyes down the front of her dress and to a pool of blood on the floor. Now, the folks here at the inn, they've had investigators come to check out this room, because the thing is that Tilly doesn't die in Gettysburg. She doesn't die in this home. She goes on, she lives a very long life. She gets married, she raises children, she moves out of town. So they couldn't explain why this was happening. But the investigators came in and they checked things out here at the inn, and they will tell you that even though Tilly doesn't die here, from what Tilly saw, what she experienced, she will never, ever be a child again. She will never be the same after everything that she saw during the Battle of Gettysburg. And so while they don't believe that it is Tilly that is still present in this inn, they do believe that it's Tilly's childhood spirit and innocence that it will forever haunt this inn. So with that, I'm going to take you guys for a little stroll around town here. We're going to head on down to the famous Farnsworth House Inn. The Farnsworth House Inn has been featured on many ghost stories, ghost shows, podcasts. There is a wealth of YouTube videos of people experiencing things here at the inn. So I'm going to take you down here and talk to you about it a little bit. And as you can see, we're getting ready for Halloween here in town. We got these lovely leaves. People are starting to put out their jack-o'-lanterns and all that great stuff. So we love it here in Gettysburg. If you ever have an opportunity, please come and see our beautiful town, because it's just an awesome place to be. We have great breweries, wineries, got some really cool bars, great food, and some really interesting characters, if you can believe that. So we're gonna get down here. And I apologize, I have tiny ears and my Bluetooth is always falling out of my ear. So we're gonna get down here past the music a little bit. It's a busy night, so the streets are pretty crowded. But I appreciate you taking this walk with me this evening. And I'm gonna get over here. Okay. Okay. So let me see. Oh, sorry. I'm trying not to bump into people. So we're going to talk about the Farnsworth House Inn. Let me locate you there. Okay. Unfortunately, I can't get in front of the building right now because they do run their own tour company, and so they are swamped with tours, just like we are tonight. We're super busy here with Civil War Ghosts as well. So the Farnsworth House Inn, like I said, has been featured in many paranormal shows, podcasts, and you can get a lot of these interviews and things like that on YouTube. But I'm going to share with you about what it was during the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, the Farnsworth House Inn was built in 1810, way before the battle. And around 1833, it gets its brick facade. It's a beautiful home. And all of the hauntings happen in this main building right here. Now, during the Battle of Gettysburg, it becomes a field hospital. Now, if you could help it, you didn't want to end up in one of these field hospitals. The reason is that with over 10,000 wounded men here in this small town, we don't have an unlimited amount of doctors or surgeons. And again, I told you, there's not a hospital within a day of here. And so if you have any medical or surgical know-how, you're getting placed in charge of one of these field hospitals. Now, these field hospitals are most known for their amputations. So on the south side wall, on the other side of the building, they do have all of these white painted spots because they have highlighted all the bullet holes from Union fire on that side wall, of which there are over 100. Now, during the battle, during the time that it is a field hospital, what they become most known for are the amputations. So when you see the holes that these musket balls make in the brick are very large. You can only imagine if it does that to brick, what it does to human flesh. And so by today's standards, we would be able to patch you up likely, be able to put everything back together the way that it was left, right? Except back in 1863, we have no idea, no technology. We don't have the time or the ability to really put you back together the right way. So the best we can do, you take a musket ball to your forearm, we're going to cut you off at the elbow. We're going to wrap up your wound with some linen, and then we're going to get you off the dining room table, and we're going to get the next guy on. The reason I say dining room table is because these folks had to work with what they had available to them. And so these are just regular homes that Confederates and Union men are taking over and turning into these field hospitals. So you won't see your surgeons scrubbing into their elbows with gloves. You won't see them with masks. You won't have a super surgical environment to have your surgery done. In fact, you won't even have anesthesia. You know the term bite the bullet? They would have these men bite down on bullets or belts. And I can only imagine that you pray to the Lord above that you're going to pass out before you actually are coherent during this process while you're losing an arm and leg, or you're having a bullet pulled out of your body from somewhere. It's gruesome. And they talked about how there would be so much blood from these surgeries that it would pull up on the floor. And so the Farnsworth House Inn and many of the field hospitals here in town, they drill holes in the wooden floors to drain the blood to lower levels so that the doctors and nurses could keep working. What do we do with those arms and legs and hands and whatever we're amputating? Well, with over 10,000 bodies on the ground here in town, we don't have time to worry about it. We don't have anywhere to put them. So you would walk down the streets of Gettysburg and not only see these dead men on the ground, these poor soldiers who were left to rot, you would see outside of these field hospitals piles of limbs up to the bottom of windowsills all over the town of Gettysburg, just because they're tossing them out the window as they're working. It's the best we can do. And this is before germ theory, folks. So we believe that pus is a sign of good healing. And you won't see your doctor wiping off their instruments or sterilizing them. You might see your doctor more likely scraping the blood off on their boots and going from you right to the next guy. So if what hurts you doesn't kill you, they might kill you trying to save your life. Now, with all jokes aside, they really do save many men, even with these antiquated procedures. But man, they go through literal hell here in town trying to do it. Now, before the battle in the early 1800s, there's a family that lives here, and they have an 8-year-old boy named Jeremy. Now, Jeremy is one of the most famous, most popular little boy ghosts here in town. And the Farnsworth House Inn has many, many resident ghosts. I'm only going to share a couple with you because I could stand out here for a whole hour and just talk to you about the Farnsworth House Inn. But Jeremy, when his family lives here, he's standing out in front of the inn. And you'll see a road right here. We're main road with cars now, but at the time it was horse and carriages. And Jeremy was playing a game that we would call chicken nowadays. And him and his friends are running into the road, and they're tagging those carriages, and then they're running back to the house. Well, poor Jeremy, when he runs out to tag the carriage, he slips, loses his footing, and he is run over by that carriage. He doesn't die right away, but they said that his family scoops him up out of the street. They take him up to what is now the famous Sarah Black Room. That was formerly his nursery. And they rock him in a rocking chair until he passes away. Now, if you come here to the inn, you'll know a couple things if you're a ghost enthusiast, because they have bartenders, cooks, servers, and paranormal investigators, all part of their regular team. And the paranormal investigator's job is to communicate with the resident ghosts. And so they know that Jeremy likes cars. He likes anything with wheels. And this has become such a popular, known thing amongst ghost enthusiasts that people come from all over the world to stay here at the inn, and they bring cars for Jeremy. Now, so much so that the folks that own the inn have begged people to please stop bringing these toy cars because they have nowhere to put them. Now, if you went to sleep in the Sarah Black Room on your stay here, you might go to bed and there might not be anything underneath of it. But when you wake up in the morning, you could wake up with a little toy duck on wheels, wooden, very old, with a little string, right underneath your bed in the center of the floor. That was one of Jeremy's favorite toys, but he generally likes anything with wheels. He's a precocious little boy like he would be in life. He runs up and down the hallways, knocks on doors. He likes to misplace things around the inn and play pranks on people. Again, everything a regular 8-year-old boy would do, that's what Jeremy does here. And the guests that come here to visit, they really love Jeremy. Now, my next guest that I'm going to talk about here at the end, not as popular as Jeremy. So he's a Confederate soldier who bleeds out in the basement of the inn during the battle. His name is Walter. Now, word around town is that Walter is not very fond of women. You see, if you go into that basement and you are a lady, you may feel stomach cramps, discomfort. Women have said that they felt a panic and a shortness of breath. We've had women say that they felt as if someone was reaching around their neck and squeezing to constrict their airway with no explanation of what it is. And the folks here at the inn believe that that's Walter. Now, I had to do a little investigation of my own because if you learn about the other ghosts here in town, they all seem to live very happy in their afterlife. They communicate with one another, we're told, and everybody gets along. But Walter sticks to himself. So I found out, by a lot of research and talking to people, that Walter receives a Dear John letter from his wife before the battle, saying if you survive the war, you do not have a wife, children, or a home to come back to. And so, as we know, Walter dies here in the inn. And so they believe that Walter is not a fond appreciator of women because of the letter that his wife sends him before the battle, which makes sense. But the most interesting story that we've heard here actually came from a couple that were on our tour. And they had gone on a tour with one of our tour guides one evening, and he found out that they were staying in the famous Sarah Black Room. So much stuff happens in that room. So, of course, very excited, and all of us here at Civil War Ghosts do this. we're going to give you our email address and our personal phone number because we want to know what happens with your stay when you come into town. And so our friend, our tour guide friend, did just that. And he gave the email address and he said, please, if anything paranormal happens to you, please let us know. And so he gets an email about 2 weeks after their stay here. And it's a married couple and they're ghost enthusiasts. So they're so excited to stay here in the Sarah Black room. So they said they go to bed that night, but they never go to sleep. You see, they get all snuggled up, they get warm, and they're laying there, but they're too excited to sleep because they're anticipating something paranormal, right? Maybe a disembodied voice, maybe a footstep, something unusual. What they do here sounds like furniture being dragged through their room. Weird, right? So they decide, let's leave the lights off. Let's not do anything just yet. Let's just wait and see what happens. And so the couple lays there in the dark and they're listening. Eventually the sound stops. They wait and make sure that it's done. And when it's finished, they turn the light on. Well, at the foot of their bed on the floor is a solid wood, old school rocking chair. Now, there was a rocking chair in the room, but that's not where it was when the lights were on before they went to bed. Not only that, this rocking chair is flipped upside down. So they never went to sleep. No one ever came in their room. So what was it? Well, I got to tell you, even the most enthusiastic of ghost hunters couldn't handle that nonsense. So they are how we found out about this policy here at the Farnsworth House Inn. You see, they decided we don't need to stay the rest of the night. That's okay. So they packed up their stuff and they were going to look for other accommodations. Well, they found out that the folks here at the inn, this happens so often in these historically haunted rooms that they keep a room on rent at a more modern hotel here in town 365 days a year. And they extend that offer to you if you can't hack it overnight in one of those rooms, especially the Sarah Black room. If you can't make it overnight, they will let you stay in that room at the more modern hotel. But if you have to take them up on that room, you're paying for both rooms. But it's still nice that they don't make you sleep in your car and they don't make you sleep down here at the bar. So we're going to head on up to the Jenny Wade house. This is a little bit of a hike, but you get to check out all the sights and sounds we got. You'll see the bullet holes in the Farnsworth House Inn. Right back here, if you look closely, you'll see white speckles. Fortunately, I can't get too much closer because they're busy tonight. They have a bar right outside with a restaurant, so it's a lot of competition here tonight. We're going to cross the street. Hope you folks are enjoying your time. We're going to put on our lights, safety first. I'll give you a shot of the town here. Hopefully I won't give you a shot of me getting hit by a car. All right. So what's interesting here in Gettysburg is that ghost life is such a big part of the culture here that pretty much everyone that grew up here and lives here believes in ghosts, and they do not joke about it. This is very real here in town. And this is a cool thing to point out. This is not a ghost story, but I'm going to share it with you real quick. This is a witness tree here in town. We have several. It's an old sycamore tree. They call it a witness tree because it was here during the Battle of Gettysburg. There's a placard on the ground that says that Abraham Lincoln passed this tree on his way to give the Gettysburg Address at the National Cemetery. So I'd like to point that out because it's just very cool living history that we have here in town. You could really spend a week here in Gettysburg and still not learn everything there is to learn. You can check out, we have a lot of restaurants, ice cream shops. Like I said, the streets are a little busy tonight, so we're making our way up here. All right. I'll give you a glimpse here. Now, right here, this house, I'm going to give you a little history about that while we're walking up the street. See, that's the John Rupp house. Now, sorry, I'm trying to figure out a way to hold this properly. So, it's owned by John Rupp. And John Rupp has 5 children and his wife. And before things really get going here, and we were just on the Confederate side of town, things start happening first on that end. And John realizes very quickly, around that July 1st date, that things are going to get pretty dangerous here in town. So John decides to get his wife and his children out of town while he can, but he decides to stay home and wait it out in the basement so he can keep an eye on his home. Now, a lot of civilians end up doing this during the battle. The reason is, if you don't have anywhere else to go, you can't just jump in the car and get out quick back then. You had to make plans to get out of town. And if they don't have anywhere to go, they're forced in their basement, especially on the side of town where Tilly Pierce was. We're entering the Union-occupied side of town now. But, how are you? Good to see you too. Has some guests out here. So, a lot of the civilians were forced to wait it out in the basement. And so John does just that. But he writes a diary while he's down there for those 3 days. And he talks a lot about the fierce fire exchange that he's hearing outside on the street. Well, he doesn't know to what extent until he comes up after the battle. You see, after the battle, after July 3rd, when things calm down, John comes up out of his basement. He looks out the back porch, dead Confederate soldiers everywhere. Comes out the front porch, he's got dead Union men. And what he writes in his journal is that he could cup his hands together like this, run them along the floor of his home on the inside, and pick up hundreds of spent bullets. Because John realizes quickly that fierce fire exchange he was hearing was happening right above his head, because they were firing at each other through his home. Now, when he finally gets his kids back here to town, they start complaining about something unusual. They keep telling their dad, we hear bees, we hear buzzing, we can't sleep. So John's perplexed by this. He can't figure out what is happening. And so John decides, I'm going to talk to my neighbor. His neighbor is a veteran. Maybe see what he thinks about all this. So when he goes to his neighbor, he tells him, my kids keep complaining about bees and this buzzing sound. And his neighbor looks at him, he says, John, it's interesting because what you're describing almost exactly sounds like musket balls. When they fly back and forth past each other at a rapid rate, creates a buzzing sound. Now, John knows what has happened inside of his home. And then he starts to think that maybe his home is in some kind of time loop, or that there's some residual energy left over in the home. So John tears the house down. It gets rebuilt in the Gothic revival style that it was in. And it said that John leaves town, takes his family, never comes back to Gettysburg. So we're never quite sure if that buzzing sound ever stops. All right, that's just a quick story. We're finally up at the Jenny Wade house. And I'm gonna stand right here, I think. Try to figure out the best way to do this. We'll go up a little bit. Oh, look at that cute little corgi. Hi, buddy. All right. So we have the Jenny Wade house right here. So Jenny Wade is one of the most famous people here in Gettysburg. The reason is she's the only civilian casualty during the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, this is called the Jenny Wade house, but her name's not Jenny and it's actually not her house. This is her death house. You see, her name is Mary Virginia Wade, and her family calls her Ginny, short for Virginia. Now, newspaper company comes here to town after Jenny dies, And they want to report about her death because we're used to hearing about men dying in the war. We're not used to hearing about the women. So this is a huge story. And so they come and they ask the young girl's name. And the family says, Jenny Wade. The reporter writes down the name Jenny, Jennie, Wade, making her Jenny instead of Ginny forevermore. Now, when I say it's not her house, this home is actually a duplex. So if you see between the 4 windows, there's actually a wall separating the 2 sides. The right side of the home is owned by a family that is not here during the Battle of Gettysburg. And the left side is owned by Jenny's sister, Georgia, and her husband. Now, Georgia's husband is off fighting in the Civil War, and she has just had her newborn baby boy right before the battle begins. What a time. And so Jenny's mother was up here helping Georgia with the new baby. Jenny is actually down on Breckenridge Street. So where we started with Tilly Pierce, that's right on the corner of Breckenridge. So about a quarter mile down the street. And Jenny decides, let me take my 2 younger brothers. Let's get up to the Georgia's house so we can be together with the newborn baby. Things are getting kind of scary on that end of town. Now, at the time, that was more in town, more of the city. And where we're standing now, this is more of the outskirts of town, more of the country part. And so it seems like a good move. There would be less fighting on this end of town. And that was an unfortunate misstep for Jenny. Now, while Jenny's here, she gets to work with her mother, and they're baking bread and biscuits for the family. But if you've ever smelled fresh baked bread, well, it's wafting out of this home, and it's going over to the fields where we have Union men stationed. And they're kind of poking around, and the ladies here, Jenny Wade and her mother, realize, this is how we can help these heroes here in town. We can make bread and biscuits and give them water and give them the littlest bit of comfort from home. And so that's what they do on July 1st and July 2nd. Now, on July 3rd, very early in the morning, Jenny continues this practice. She gets up in the morning, she goes into the parlor, and she rolls out more dough to make bread. Now, Jenny is facing this direction, and she's leaned over a table, and she's rolling out dough in her bread box. Well, the door on the side of the home, a stray bullet from the Confederate side of town goes through that side door, goes through the parlor door. It strikes Jenny in the back when she's bent over. It goes through her heart. She died instantly. 8:30 in the morning, July 3rd. She is only 20 years old. And they said that you could hear her mother screaming, "Georgia, your sister is dead." And the Union men hear the screams of the family, and so they come around the back of the building and they run into that side door. What does that do? That draws Confederate fire from the other side of town. Now, the soldiers are trying to figure out how to get the family to safety, what they're going to do with Jenny's body. And so they go up to the 2nd floor, and they see that an artillery shell has pierced the roof and is lodged in that wall dividing the 2 homes. And so they push through that artillery shell, and they use the butts of their guns to dig a hole big enough to get the family through to the right side of the home, down the right side of the house, and into the basement, where they lay Jenny's body out for the remainder of the battle. Now, they even take a rocking chair down there for Georgia because they don't want a new mother to have to sit on the floor with her newborn baby boy. Now, in the basement on their neighbor's side, they lay Jenny out, the quilt over top of her, and she is down there until July 5th because we have pickets charge on July 3rd. It's not successful. It ends the Battle of Gettysburg. The Confederates retreat out of town. Union has won. And on July 4th, it's pouring down rain here in town. So on July 5th, they bring Jenny's body up and they bury her in her sister's flower garden. She's there for 6 months before she is buried properly at the German Reformed Church on the other side of town, where she is for 1 year before she is buried one last time in Evergreen Cemetery, the other side of town. Why so many times? Well, you see, when Jenny dies, they find a picture of a young man in her apron pocket. Now, they know who this man is. His name is Jack Skelly. He is a boy who grew up here in town. He's known Jenny since they were children, but they don't know why she has this picture. So they start to think that they're never going to find out that the secret died with Jenny. But what they don't know is that Jack is fighting in the Civil War. He was wounded in the Battle of Winchester, and he dies 9 days after Jenny does. Now, Jenny's already been buried at the German Reformed Church up on High Street when they get Jack's things back here to Gettysburg. And they look through his items and they find letters exchanged between him and Jenny indicating that they were secretly engaged to be married. I know, right? Sad love story. But it's that story that prompts the legend about the local legend about the door. You see, on the side of the house where the bullet hole was, it's the original door, the original bullet hole. And so it's said that if you go and you put your ring finger into that hole in that door, that you will be engaged to be married within a year. Now, if you take a tour inside the home, you will see testimonies of people as well as wedding photos of them swearing that it works. But let me tell you about the ghost stories here. You would think that it was Jenny that would be here more often, that her spirit would be the one that haunts this home. But the folks here at the Jenny Wade house don't believe that it's Jenny. They actually believe that it's Georgia, her sister. You see, Georgia's husband survives the war. He comes back to Gettysburg. He takes Georgia and the baby. They move to Iowa, and they live there for the rest of her life. But every year, during the anniversary of the battle from July 1st to July 3rd, the family comes back here to pay respects to Jenny, and they come back to visit this home. So in this front window here, trying to point correctly, this one over here, it's always turned backwards with the camera. So the left side window on the bottom there next to the red door, that was George's bedroom. And so folks have said to have seen unusual bursts of light there. They'll take pictures and get orbs. But the folks here at the Jenny Wade house have said that people will come to them all the time right around that first week of July and ask who the young woman was in the window. And when they're asked, they tell them, what young woman? And they don't believe that it's Jenny. They believe that it's Georgia. But that's not the most interesting story here. You see, if you go into the basement of the home where Jenny's body was laid out, they still have that wooden rocking chair that was once Georgia's. And it's sitting right next to a mannequin that's laid out representing Jenny's body. So many tour groups have gone down there and have run into a long-faced, skinny, frail old man sitting in that chair. And you see, I left a friend out of this story. You see, I didn't tell you about Jenny's father, James Wade. You see, James is not a very likable guy here in town. He's kind of a drinker, gambler. He's combative with law enforcement. He doesn't have a good reputation at all. And he's a tailor here in town, and he's very poor. He'd also run around on his wife, but that's a story for another day. Now, the story goes is that James is here. He has a guest come into his parlor shop to get some work done and drops a handsome sum of money on the tailor shop floor. Well, the proper thing to do back then would have been to post in the newspaper that you found this money and let the rightful owner come and claim it. Well, James is not an honest man, so he puts that money in his pocket. Now, James might not be honest, but he's not stupid, because he doesn't stay here in Gettysburg to spend that money. He goes over the Maryland line, which is only a few miles away. He spends the money over there in another town. He gets caught anyway, and he is sentenced to 2 years of solitary confinement at Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. And if you know anything about Eastern State, you know that that has a wealth of its own ghost stories. Now, James does his time, and he makes it back here to Adams County, Pennsylvania, here in Gettysburg, and they put him in what is called the Adams County Almshouse. Sorry, something popped up here. And it's basically a poor house. It's basically for people who are unable mentally to care for themselves. Now, the family would go and visit James at the almshouse, but he refuses his entire life to believe that Jenny is dead. He believes that she is ashamed of him and she's run off and she never wants anything else to do with him. So if you go into that basement, that's who you might see, Mr. James Wade. Now, when I say Mr. Wade, I'm referring to what the tour guides here will tell you, because he is not a man that likes to be disrespected. And so if you call him by his first name and you don't call him Mr. Wade out of respect, you might just have something fly through that room and hit you. In fact, the tour guides, when they go down there, they will announce to Mr. Wade, Mr. Wade, we are coming down. We won't be here long. It is his space, not anybody else's. But what's interesting is that he will stand up from that chair. If you were lucky enough to run into him, he'll stand up and walk to the back of the room right through the brick wall. Well, we had a guest on our tour one evening, 17-year-old girl, and when we came up here, she asked me, are we stopping here? And I said, yeah, this is the Jenny Wade house. I'm going to tell you a story. And she said, I don't like it here. And I said, well, let me tell you the story first. She said, no, she was here a year ago, and she was standing against that brick wall in the back of the room listening to the tour guide when she said she felt someone wrap their arms around her body and try to pull her through the wall. And I asked her, did they talk to you about James Wade? And she said, no, who is that? Because a lot of the tour guides here, they don't like to talk about him because they're afraid of him. So if you happen to ever visit the Jenny Wade house and you go into that basement, make sure you call him Mr. Wade. All right, folks. We're going to head on up to the orphanage here in town. This story always, this one always gets me in the gut a little bit. But I'm going to tell you why in just a minute. So we're making our way. As you can see, it's starting to get dark here in town. It's about that time. It's 6:42, so it's getting darker here these days. But we're going to take our short little walk up here. And as you can tell, I hope you can hear me well because the streets are so busy with traffic tonight. But that's just how it is on Saturdays in October. We got a lot of people to accommodate here in town. Okay, so let me find a good place to sit you guys so you can see well. Let's see, across the street here. All right. I think this will be a good place for us to set up so we're not in anybody's way. Okay. So, let me step out of the way here. So this building right here, you see there's a bright yellow light on the outside, the black roof with the white windows. This is the National Soldiers Orphanage. Now, it's got a very gruesome story, but I got to start with how it came to be to begin with. You see, we hear a lot about the bigger battles here in town. If you know anything about the Battle of Gettysburg, you've surely heard about Pickett's Charge, the Peach Orchard, Devil's Den, Little Round Top. But there were some smaller skirmishes that happened here in town that a lot of folks don't really get to hear about. And so, excuse me, it's chilly night. So there is a battle, there's a part of the battle in Coons Brickyard on the north end of town. And Confederates outnumber Union 2-1. And our Union men are dying at a rapid rate. They can't get a hold of the situation. They can't keep up. And so a decision has to be made. So they tell one infantry to please stay and fight so that they could get as many Union men out of that brickyard into safety, because they're going to need as much help as they can get here in town. And so they knew that this was a death sentence, but these men turn around and they fight. They said they have about enough time to fire off a shot before they are killed. And after the Battle of Gettysburg, if you can imagine being a civilian here and seeing the physical devastation of everything that has happened, where do you even begin to clean up this mess? And they go into that brickyard and they come upon about 800 dead men on the ground. Well, one has died, his torso upright against a post. His legs are spread out in front of him. His head is hung down, but he's got his hands clasped in front of him. They go and look in his hands, and they see a picture of 3 small children. And what that told us was this man, knowing he's about to die, wants to pull out a picture, and he wants to stare at his kids. That's the last thing he wants to see before he goes. And so we want to know who this man is. And so they post a picture of the children in the newspaper. And it circulates here in Gettysburg. It circulates around to neighboring states and towns. And it makes its way to New York. And it is in New York that Felinda Humiston opens up her newspaper one morning, sees a picture of her 3 children, and finds out that her husband, Sergeant Amos Humiston, has died in Gettysburg. Now, after the battle, months later, this becomes the orphanage. Now, what better way to honor Sergeant Amos Humiston's sacrifice than to invite his wife, Felinda, to be the headmistress of the orphanage? And so she agrees, and she brings their 3 children. She moves into this orphanage, and she runs it over 9 years' time. Now, she's a wonderful woman. She's kind. She's beautiful. She educates the kids. She feeds them well. She genuinely loves them and raises them right along with her own children. And the kids really thrive here with her. You know the tradition where they will have children go out to national cemeteries and leave out flags on soldiers' graves? She started that tradition. Now, after 9 years, she's done her time. She gets remarried, and she wants to go and live her life. And so Felinda respectfully resigns as headmistress, but that's when things take a very unfortunate turn for the orphanage. You see, they appointed Miss Rosa Carmichael in charge of the orphanage. And Rosa is every bit of what we would consider a child abuser to be. She beats the kids, strangles them, starves them. She would give them medication to purposely make them sick and vomit. And that's not even the worst part. You see, if you go into the basement of the inn, they have what is called the pit. Now, you can still take a tour here if you're ever in town, and you can go down into that basement, and you can crawl into the pit. It's a 5x5 stone-lined cell where she would chain children up by their wrists for days at a time in that dark, damp basement with no food or water, just for disobeying her rules. Now, it's not until we have 2 men wandering down the street one evening, and they hear the cries of a small child, and they have no idea what it is. So they follow the cries, and they come upon a shed. They open the doors, and inside is a very little boy, around 5 or 6 years old. He's skin and bones. And they have, I'm sorry. He's skin and bones. No, it's okay. I just want to make sure you guys are okay. He's skin and bones. And he's got a light cotton shirt on, pants ripped and tattered, no shoes or socks. And he's freezing, and he's shaking, and he's crying. So they get this man out of the, they get this child out of the shed, and they take him to the police department, and they come and arrest Rosa. Now, she's charged with child abuse and neglect. She pays a $2 fine, and everybody get ready for your mind to be blown. They put her back in charge of these children. Now, this continues to happen. It's not until a 14-year-old boy escapes the orphanage. Now, he's smart. He doesn't stay here in town. He goes to the next town. Doesn't go to their police department. He goes to the newspaper. Tells them everything that's happening here at the orphanage. That Civil War heroes' children are being abused in Gettysburg. And as you can imagine, people around here are not happy about it. And so the townspeople demand that Rosa's arrested a second time. This time she's charged with the misappropriation of government funds, and she pays a $20 fine. Now, after that, history says that she was sent out of town, never come back, and never to return. But if you talk to the folks who live here and have had generations of people who live here who know who Rosa is, they will tell you that Rosa was released to the townspeople. She was brought up to this hill, and she was buried alive in an unmarked grave. And I think she got off pretty easy, if I'm being honest. Now, the unfortunate thing is that they do believe that Rosa still haunts this building, as well as the orphaned children. Because when you go into that basement, you may feel someone pulling at your clothing, poking you, tugging at you. You might hear the cries of children, kids laughing. We've even had guests on our tour recently who told us that her hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and she felt someone put their finger into their ponytail, rip it out, breaking the little ponytail tie and releasing her hair. Now, the most interesting story that we've heard, though, is from a person who used to work here for the orphanage. You see, she was here in town. It was slow season, and she was manning the shop during the day. Nobody had been in. It was very quiet, and so she decided to come out front. She had some Windex, some paper towels. She's going to wipe down the windows. Got to find something to do, right? Well, while she's out here, the sun's reflecting really high in the sky, and so it's putting this huge glare on the window. She can't really see in. So as she's wiping, she kind of sees in the shadow her hand is making something moving around inside. Well, she keeps watching, but at some point her curiosity peaks, because if you decide to work in one of these historically haunted locations, then you must be hoping to see something unusual, right? So she puts her things down. She steps into that window. She puts her hands over her eyes like this. She puts a foot forward. She puts her nose on that glass pane. She said, looking back at her just inches from her face, two stone cold blue eyes, thin, tight, pursed lips, hair pulled back in a tight bun, and a high starch neck Victorian collar. Now, what she describes almost exactly resembles what we know Rosa Carmichael to look like. And she said she stepped away from the window, but then she went back to look one more time, just in case maybe her eyes are playing tricks on her. But when she stepped back into that window, just a few seconds later, nothing's there. Now, folks have said in that top left window, there we go, on this side, you may look into the corner of the window. You see the curtain pulled away just a little bit, just a little sliver of space left. And you might see the chubby-faced little boy with short brown hair looking at you from that window. And he'll come in, he'll look down on the street, and then recede into the darkness of the window. A lot of the times we do often have people who will get orbs and unusual bursts of light right around that window. So the orphanage has some pretty unusual things still happening here. The saddest part for me is the children. Now, folks, we're coming up on the end of our tour. Now, I just want to stop and say, I appreciate so much that you wanted to come out and hang out with me here in Gettysburg this evening. I so enjoy spending my time talking to people about our history, the battle history, and everything that's happened here, especially our ghostly history. But if you want to learn more, you could definitely check out Civil War Ghosts online. We also have U.S. Ghost Adventures, where we do live stream tours of many different cities here in the United States. But we're happy to have you out anytime. And I'd also like to thank our folks that had us out this evening. We really appreciate it. I hope that you were entertained and you had a great time.
To be honest with you, Mandy, it's been fantastic. We've sat watching you for the past hour, taking us around all the historic places, and I'm absolutely amazed. I said to my partner, this is one place that I want to visit. So thank you so much for joining us. And, you know, we hope to see you again very soon on one of our chat-in pages. But, you know, stay safe because it's quite dark there now. And I just want to thank you and say I'm very appreciative that you've taken the time to spend an hour taking everybody around, you know, the history of Gettysburg. And, you know, hopefully one day soon we all may get to visit there. So thank you ever so much.
You are so welcome, and I had such a great time. So anytime, hit me up.
Okay, take care.
You guys have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you later. Mandy from Civil War Ghost signing out.
See you later. Thank you. Okay, so how cool was that? We had an amazing, well, I sat there watching on the big screen in the living room, and it was so interesting. And just hearing somebody else talk about the history tours with such passion is just remarkable. But keep on, stay tuned in, because we have Paracom coming up. Now they are doing a investigation live for us. Now, for all of you who are out there in the US of A tonight and are currently watching us, this is in the British School Museum, which is just outside of Hitchin, which is in the center of England. Now, you know, I don't know what they're going to be getting up to, but like you can imagine, it's a paranormal investigation. So, you know, maybe we may hear something. Maybe we may have, you know, more evidence than ever on a live stream like this. So please stay tuned. Make sure that you've got your eyes peeled. I know it's late. We've had a fantastic day, but keep your eyes peeled, and we will be back very shortly.